All right, everyone. Okay, good afternoon again, everyone. I hope you've been enjoying your lunch. If you can take your seats once again, if you've gotten up to walk around. Thank you all for being here today. It's my honor to introduce someone who's dedicated the career to working day in and day out to help students bring conservative ideas to their schools. Patrick Coyle serves as the Vice President at Young America's Foundation and also as the Executive Director for Young Americans for Freedom, our chapter affiliate on high school and college campuses nationwide. There's nothing leftist administrators can do in attempts to block a YAF lecture that Pat hasn't already overcome. In fact, he's often the first call for students when leftists seek to censor their ideas. An administrator tries to block your event? Call Pat. Professor tears down your posters? Call Pat. School newspaper calls you bigoted fascists? Call Pat, then call me. Pat has seen, heard, and done it all, both as a YAF activist at his alma mater, Penn State, and now to help students boldly advance their ideas today, no matter the opposition. Please join me in welcoming the notorious Patrick X. Coyle.
Thank you all. Thank you, Spencer. Well, we are honored to have with us today a close friend of Young America's Foundation and a tireless advocate of conservative principles, free speech, and civil rights for all Americans, David Horowitz. Although originally a founder of the New Left in the 1960s and editor of one of its largest magazines, Ramparts, David now uses their tactics and methods to motivate and inspire conservatives on the ground nationwide to effectively advocate for freedom. He has especially worked towards bringing his ideas to college campuses and has routinely partnered with Young America's Foundation throughout his career. Together, Young America's Foundation and David have worked together on more than 300 campus lectures. Together, Young America's Foundation and David have exposed the infamous professor, you may remember, Ward Churchill, who called the victims of those murdered in the World Trade Center towers little Eichmanns in a face-to-face debate at George Washington University. In partnership with the Foundation, David has repeatedly come to the defense and support of many Young Americans for Freedom chapters that have come under assault by their campus administrations, and he routinely takes time out of his busy schedule to mentor our top activists at our Reagan Ranch retreat each year. For his service to the conservative movement, Young America's Foundation awarded him with our Lifetime Achievement Award. In 1988, David created the Center for the Study of Popular Culture as a vehicle for his campaigns, and it was later renamed the David Horowitz Freedom Center in July of 2006 to institutionalize his campaigns against the left and its anti-Americanism. David is the author of many, many books, including his autobiography, Radical Son, which has been described as the first great autobiography of his generation, and it chronicles his odyssey from radical activism to his current positions. And his latest book, which you all have, Big Agenda, the President Trump's Plan to Save America, is currently a New York Times bestseller. So please give a warm welcome to David Horowitz.
Thank you, Patrick. And I want to thank our host, Wendy McCaw, who is a force, such a force for good in this area and way beyond, and Ron and Michelle and Andrew for inviting me here. The students here are really privileged to be in what I would have called, when I was a leftist, a vanguard organization. It's very important. This is the most impressive conservative organization. I've watched it grow over 30 years. And in my view, one of the most important, because it's about the future. It is a leadership training organization. When I came out of the left, the first thing I said was, where's the ground war on the right? Where's the conservative SDS? And Ron has created that. Of course, not exactly SDS, but civilizations die when they cease to believe in themselves. They lose the power to defend themselves and the will to survive. We are witnessing the death of Europe as we speak for that very reason. Europe has accepted millions of people who absolutely despise them. There are rape epidemics across Europe, and the governments protect the rapists and persecute and prosecute heroic objectors to the rape epidemics like Katie Hopkins. There are no-go zones where these invaders say, this is where your authority stops, where the police can't go and don't go. With the collusion of all the, I hate the term liberal because they're bigots. They're not liberal about anything except spending your money and hard drugs and sex. But everything else, they're the most intolerant people. But they embrace this. And why do they embrace it? Because they condemn their own countries. This was all summed up for me. So it's on YouTube. The leader of the Green Party in Germany, speaking in front of the Reichstag, the parliament, said in 30 years, ethnic Germans will be a minority in Germany. And that's a good thing. Let that sink in. Europe has been persuaded, if you like, by the left. It has a gigantic guilt complex. It's one of the greatest, if not the greatest civilization in the history of the world, European civilization. And yet they can't summon the will to defend themselves. America has an inspirational vision that empowers us, that makes us want to protect her, that makes us want to survive. And you all know it. It's right in our birth certificate. The idea that all of God's creatures are equal in the eyes of God and therefore must be equal in the eyes of government, and that they are endowed by their Creator with the right to liberty, individual freedom. That people are not judged by their origins, they're not judged by their race, they're not judged by their ethnicity, they're judged according to their merits. That's our founding idea. It's under attack. And part of my mission as a former leftist is to get conservatives to stop being so nice. These people are evil, and they intend evil. The left, well, actually, I forgot to take this out. I got to that point in life where my head is somewhat like Swiss cheese, so I have to read these quotes. But what the left says to America is that you are a nation built on slavery and genocide. That is a death sentence for our country, and they intend it that way. Here's what Obama said. He said, the legacy of slavery, Jim Crow, discrimination in almost every institution of our lives casts a long shadow, and it's still part of our DNA that's passed on. We're not cured of it. How many people know who Ta-Nehisi Coates is? Ta-Nehisi Coates, he's the son of a Black Panther, was called by George Packer, who was a relatively sober leftist at the Atlantic Monthly, as the most important writer in America. He won the National Book Award in 2016. His books and his articles are assigned. He's just written a book on the Obama years. Invited to the White House by Obama, celebrated MacArthur Genius Award. Ta-Nehisi Coates, in the book that won the National Book Award, said, white supremacy is so foundational to this country that it will not be defeated in my lifetime, my child's lifetime, or perhaps ever. We are white supremacist racists. He is a raving anti-American racist. In this book, the book is built around, it's a letter to his son. His friend was killed by a policeman in Montgomery County in Maryland. The problem for him is that the policeman said that his friend was trying to run him over with his vehicle. The policeman was black, the district attorney's black, I can't remember, but probably the mayor's black. He lists all the black authorities there. And he explains it by saying they were thinking white. How racist is that? He actually says in this book that there's no such thing as black on black crime because it's white people who force blacks to kill each other. And like I say, I mean, this is an incredibly celebrated young author. And of course, there's Nancy Pelosi, who said that Trump's immigration plan, his compromise on DACA, is a plan to make America white again. See these 1,800,000 immigrants from South America, not all probably, but probably 95 or 98% of them non-white, yet who Trump said could come into this country if they will let us secure our borders. That's white supremacy. This is what we're up against. And it's time for us to understand the gravity. Why this has proceeded so far that the universities across the country have whiteness studies. And what whiteness studies teach is that race is a social construct. There's no such thing as race, and that whiteness has to be abolished, which is us. This is what's taught in our universities. I'm talking Harvard, Yale, University of California. In fact, in my Twitter feed this morning, the University of California has issued an edict that if they don't say if you're white, but that's what it is. But if you say you're not racist, that's racism. Now, where does this all come from? It comes from an evolution of the communist movement. The left in this country, progressives, Black Lives Matter actually was created by 3 Maoists, literally, and is embraced by the Democratic Party, a violent, racist organization. But it comes out of the Marxist left. In the 60s, we realized, we on the left, if you had met me in the 60s and asked me how I define my politics, I would say I'm a revolutionary Marxist. In the 60s, we kind of realized when the hard hats, the construction workers, were beating up leftist demonstrators that Marx's model sort of didn't work, where the working class was going to create this revolution. So all these people, to avoid fighting communists in Southeast Asia, stayed in the universities and now control them, literally. This left controls our universities. And they devised, or they created, a theory which is referred to as cultural Marxism, but you know as identity politics. Marx's model was there's an oppressive ruling class, capitalists, owners of the means of production, and they oppress everybody. And actually, Marx's, well, I was going to say it was a much more coherent ideology, even though it was completely crap. and incredibly destructive. Okay, so when it didn't work, what the leftists, what I would call, what should have been called neo-communists, they just transferred it to race, gender, sexual orientation. I mean, they'll keep finding things. It's the same idea, though, that there's this ruling caste. It's white heterosexual males. Not very subtle. And if you eliminate them, the world will be paradise. They have phrases that encapsulate this, which all the young people here have, well, it's not just the young people. Everybody, unfortunately, uses this. One of the phrases is people of color. Now, you forgive me for this language, but this is a bastardized term. It's not English. We don't say, here's a box of crayons of color. Here's a television of color. It's French. It's a French construction, and that serves an ideological purpose. Because the whole world is people of color, except guess who? The bad guys. White people. Is people of color a group? You tell that to the Rwandans, where the Hutus massacred, I think they killed a million Tutsis. They're all black. They're all people of color. Where is their unity of interest? How do you see the Hutus who massacred the Tutsis as the oppressed? Latino Americans, all these terms from the left. Are Latino Americans a homogenous group? You think that Cubans and Puerto Ricans have the same kind of attitudes towards whatever it is, work, family, politics, and so forth? If people of color were oppressed, well, first of all, why would all the Haitians want to come here? Why would people of color want to come to America? To be oppressed? They risk their lives to get here because they have more rights. Don't just take Haitians. More rights, more privileges, and more opportunities in America than they do in Haiti, which has been run by people of color for over 200 years. Haiti had its revolution in the 18th century. They come here because people on the ground still know up from down. Maharajas in India are people of color. The beheaders in Raqqa, well, no, they're not in Raqqa anymore, but the ISIS beheaders, those are people of color. As I say, everybody in the world is people of color, and therefore, according to the left and the Democratic Party platform, if you've ever subjected yourself to reading it, they're oppressed and marginalized. Ho, ho, ho. And I'm sure every young person in this room has had a lecture on this from their teachers. Sexism. There's another bastardized term. Where does sexism come from? It was actually invented. You can look it up in Wikipedia, although the minute I saw that word, I hated it, and I knew where it came from. It's leftists who wanted to culturally appropriate the moral authority of the civil rights movement, of the fight against racism, sexism. Racism, sexism. It's an insult to every black person in this country. The word itself. But what's its effect? Before there was sexism, there was behavior that was rude, behavior that was inappropriate, behavior that was offensive, and behavior that was criminal, as in rape. But under sexism, there's no kind of distinctions. This is a totalitarian idea. In the 20s in communist Russia, an official of the Cheka, which was their secret police, wrote a memo, which I've quoted, I hope, in this pamphlet I've distributed here, how the left, how progressives use race as a weapon against our country. And what he said was, this is actually, I'm sorry, it's in the 30s, because it was the anti-kulak campaign. Kulaks were peasants who owned property. That's it. And he said, we don't care what the individual has actually done. We don't want to hear any of the particulars, because we're out to eliminate kulaks as a class. That's a totalitarian idea. You eliminate the individual. That's what America's revolutionary vision of individual rights and individual accountability is all about. That you take an individual for what they have done, who they actually are. The left wants to obliterate individuals and treat them under categories. So now you have, I mean, we've witnessed it with this Me Too absurdity. All these people who colluded and we'll go on. Nothing is going to change. The casting couch is not going to go away because people, they're greedy. You want a career, you could, this is the price. I'm thinking of the two examples. Okay, we have a comedian. Now, I detest Al Franken. He's a fraud, he's a nasty, and he's a leftist. I don't know which one is worse. But what did he do? He's a comedian. As a comedian, he did these pranks. Now, they may be offensive to some people. I mean, I have no idea. This woman who was asleep, she was offended. Okay, that's fine. But he lost the Senate seat. Over what? A joke. It was a stupid prank. He's stupid, but it was a prank, and everybody could see it. He did it on camera. Garrison Keillor, also not one of my favorite people, lost his NPR show, which he had for 30 years. They erased him from their records because he inappropriately touched the back of some woman who objected. And I've seen these women go on and say, oh, only 2% are not telling the truth. Ha ha. I mean, you put a weapon like that into people's hands. Anyway, obliteration of the individual. That's what sexism, that term, is about. Nobody should use that term. Because you lose all distinctions in behaviors. And as we all know, I'm sure the young people know. I tell you, relations between men and women, there's a lot of complexities, and it's problematic. People misunderstand each other. Sometimes people do things without, understanding that this person might not like it or what have you. I have to tell you, my sympathy goes out to every male under the age of 20, 18. My God, I mean, women are toxic now, thanks to the left. So we have a totalitarian threat here. And you can see that it's the same thing with immigration. They want to blur all distinctions. Basically, the idea is Mexicans are people of color. We are guilty whites. We built this country on genocide and slavery. It's a lie, by the way. Let's take slavery. This is an absolute lie. Slavery existed in Africa for 1,000 years before a white person ever set foot there. Slavery has existed in all societies for 3,000 years. And in all those 3,000 years, no one ever said it was immoral until Wilberforce, a white Christian male in England, said so, and Thomas Jefferson wrote it into our birth certificate as a country. And within 78 years, slavery was abolished. Every black person in this country owes their freedom to Thomas Jefferson and Abraham Lincoln and the 350,000 mainly white Union soldiers who gave their lives to free them. The truth is, blacks enslaved blacks and white people freed them. Americans can be proud of their history. And why didn't they do it at the outset of the country? Obviously, if they had declared slaves free at the birth of the country, the South would have aligned with the greatest empire in the world, England, which was still a slave nation, and destroyed the American experiment, and we might have slavery today in this country for all we know. How many people have heard and listened to the way I formulate it, that the Constitution, of course, the Constitution has to be declared an evil document by the left, that the Constitution regards black people as 3/5 of a human being. I see young people. As I taught that in school, Al Gore, all the Democrats say that. It's a lie. The Constitution of the United States does not use the word black. You will not find the word black, white, slave, woman, or male in the Constitution, because the founders actually believed in the equality of all people. They couldn't achieve it then, but they believed in it. That's why those terms are not, these are universal rights for all of God's creatures. The 3/5 compromise was actually good for the anti-slavery forces. It was about how you count the population to create a congressional district, because all congressional districts have to be equal size. And the South wanted slaves counted as a full person, even though they couldn't vote, even though they were unfree. And the anti-slave North said, no, it could only be 3/5. It had nothing to do with black people. It had to do with people who were not free, and there were 500,000 free blacks in America at the time. So these are monstrous lies about our history. And what the purpose, to return to what I said at the outset, is to destroy this country. Leftists hate America. Very important. How could they make, as the deputy head of the Democratic Party, a raving, anti-Semitic, anti-white follower of Louis Farrakhan, and a complete liar, obviously. I mean, Farrakhan's right about him lying and pretending he's changed, like Keith Ellison. How can Jay Johnson, who was the head of the Department of Homeland Security, have invited Farrakhan to speak at his, whatever it was, I can't remember, it was his college or high school graduation? I mean, if we have anybody who deserves the term like Hitlerite in America, it's Louis Farrakhan. And yet the Democratic, right at the top of the Democratic Party, Obama, you have them embracing Farrakhan and complaining because Trump said there were probably good people on both sides in Charlottesville. And this is kind of what I've tried to convey to, like I say, conservatives are way too nice, way too decent, way too tolerant. You have to understand these people hate you, and they want to destroy the country that has prospered and benefited you. That's their agenda. And they will say anything and do anything to achieve it, as we've seen. I mean, you just see it. You see it in the battle of sanctuary cities, defying federal law. How can you have a country that doesn't have borders? How can you have a country if you import millions of people? They say that, I forget what the date is, but in 20 or 30 years, America will have 400 million people. Tucker Carlson is always asking, how many people can we absorb? And they don't concern them. I can tell you as a former leftist, every morning you get up and think of ways to tear down this country, to undermine its institutions. You never give 2 seconds of thought as to how to make a society work. Here we have, and for those of you who don't know the name, Orlando Patterson was a West Indian black at Harvard. He was, I mean, I don't know what his actual politics were, but he'd be an intellectual and a leftist of sorts, but a very profound scholar. He's written a whole series of books on slavery. And he says America is the most tolerant, most equitable society in the world. If you look at the Democratic Party national platform, they pledge themselves to fight systemic racism and institutional racism. Institutional and systemic racism were outlawed over 50 years ago in the Civil Rights Acts. We have a judiciary that is flooded with leftists who don't have any respect for the Constitution, but they certainly would have respect for the Civil Rights Acts. Why aren't there prosecutions for institutional racism? Because it doesn't exist. So I think what I want conservatives to understand is that we have an existential threat in the Democratic Party and in the left. They will destroy this country. They're in the process of doing it. It's, in my mind, a miracle. And that shows, I mean, I've always said America is an incredibly resilient country. And when people get pessimistic, as there are so many reasons to look at what's happened to our schools and our culture and be pessimistic, I always remind them of a Gallup poll that was taken in April 1941. Now that all of Europe except England is under the Nazi heel. Most of Asia, all of Southeast Asia, under the Japanese heel. And Gallup asked, the Gallup question was, should the United States enter the war? 80% of the American people said no. And then came Pearl Harbor. And we're having a series of Pearl Harbors. I mean, I have been ranting about our schools, how terrible they are, how these kids are being indoctrinated. I mean, I've had verbal fights with teachers that you can't indoctrinate young people. You got to let them make up their own minds. This is not appropriate for a teacher. But this outpouring, where you have all these teacher union communists rounding up their kids and putting about to demonstrate against guns. I mean, actually, Parkland is a very good example of the totalitarian mind. When conservatives look at Parkland, they look at the details. This kid was screaming for months, years, I'm going to kill somebody. He was protected because he was Hispanic. And thanks to Jesse Jackson and Obama and the Democrats in Florida, they have a rule that if there's a disproportion, if kids of color are disproportionately singled out or punished for violence and whatever, you can't do that. You treat them as an abstract group. You don't treat individuals. The fact of the matter is that if you have 80% of black children being born out of wedlock and there's no authority figure, male authority figure in the home, you're probably going to get, actually Daniel Patrick Moynihan predicted this, again, 50 years ago, you're going to get violent behavior. But we're going to protect them because it's racism if they're disproportionately represented. Of course, nobody accuses the NBA of being racist because 95% of the multi-millionaires, actually, Shaquille O'Neal, who I adore, is a billionaire from playing basketball. Nobody accuses them of a racial conspiracy. Everybody recognizes its merit. They're better athletes in basketball. And if I were in a college, I'd be strung up for saying this, but it has something to do with the hamstrings. It's funny. You can't say, you can say, and you can make a movie, white men can't jump, but you can't say black men can jump. So every time you think that it's just craziness, I mean, these people are so out of touch with reality. When they look at Parkland, they don't see that. They don't look at the fact that the FBI ignored the warnings. They don't look at the fact that the police were there and armed, and they didn't go in. That's what caused this massacre. What they look at is color. The kid is a person of color. Blame the guns. It's that simple. So I want conservatives to see that this is a totalitarian threat. It will obliterate everything that we cherish in this country. And the Democratic Party is wedded to it. Linda Sarsour, this anti-Semitic supporter of jihad, hater of America, head of the Women's March, said, I have that somewhere too, but she said, I remember at the last demonstration, I remember that my country, I live in a country, I didn't say my country, I live in a country that was founded on the extermination of indigenous people. There are more Indians alive today than there were when the settlers arrived here, for crying out tears. It's never been America's policy to exterminate an indigenous people. But if you want to sign a death warrant for America, that's what you say. And that's what she intends. And she is embraced by the Democratic Party and the whole progressive left. So that's the message I want. I want you to see that we're in a war, and that's the way we have to fight it. And I will say, since I've given out this book I did about Trump, that we actually are blessed for all of the things where you scratch your head with a fighter. Finally, there's a Republican who fights. And I want to say about this, it was brilliantly marketed by Chris Ruddy. But it's not really about Trump's agenda, which now, I mean, we're a year and a half in. This is a book about the Democratic Party and the left, what he's up. I actually had to write it not knowing who was going to win the election. So it's what, I wrote it, it's what Trump is up against when he's up against the Democratic Party and why he is an antidote. Anyway, I especially hope the young people, I mean, all you older people, I know you're supporting this organization. It's hugely important that you do. But the younger people are on the firing line. You know, we have a lot of high school students wait till they get to college. It's just a war, and it has to be seen that way. Thank you.
Okay, we'll take a few quick questions. Just a reminder to state your name and where you're from, and if you're a student, the name of your school as well. So just raise your hand and see you.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm Catherine Brooks from Santa Clarita, California, Trinity Classical Academy. I was just wondering, what do you think for white conservatives and specifically white male conservatives, what's the best way for them to speak so that liberals will listen to them as they're being seen as oppressors?
Well, they're not liberal.
Right, yes.
So I don't think there's any way to speak to a leftist and make them see anything. What I would advise is you've got to know your history. Dinesh D'Souza has written a really good book about the Democratic Party. It's a matter of you really have to, well, like I say, if you understand that Americans, first of all, people talk about 400 years of slavery in America. Well, from 1787, when the United States of America was created, to 1865 is only 78 years. It's racist to begin with, to confuse America with the English colonies. After all, we fought a revolution against England to create this country which is all about individual freedom and individual accountability. So you have to, first of all, be confident. And this is why this is so sinister, because it's an attack. As I said, if the civilization ceases to believe in itself, that's when it dies. And that's true of all of us. So you can't credit them. If they say institution, white supremacy, how lunatic, how stupid is that? 8 years of a black president who was elected with 56% of his vote was whites. There's not a black country in the world that's elected a white president, nor is there an Asian country in the world that's elected. This is an incredible country. And anyway, you have to, what can I say? Read my books, read Dinesh's books, they're out there. You have to arm yourself, that's what it's about. But don't defer to them, and don't defer to their stupidities. And say, oh, Hillary, she ran this campaign on them. Sexism is why she was defeated, right? On the wage-gender pay gap. It's a total myth. How many people know that in 1963, the male-dominated Congress passed the Equal Pay for Equal Work Act? It's illegal to do what the Clinton Foundation does and pay women less for the same jobs.
Howdy, I'm John Keenan from Cohasset, Massachusetts. And I was just wondering what your epiphany was that made you leave the left.
Okay. I had all kinds of questions. First of all, I read books. And I tell you this, the leaders of the New Left were all semi-literate. That doesn't mean they weren't at the finest universities either. Billy Ayers, the terrorist, when he was elected vice president of SDS in 1968, in his acceptance speech, he boasted that he hadn't read a book in a year. I had nothing, as a leftist, I had nothing but contempt for these people. Because they're setting out to tear up a society and they have no clue as how to put it together again. Unfortunately for me, what happened was I raised a lot of money to buy a church, which was a school that had 35 classrooms for the Black Panther Party. And then I was editing the largest magazine of the New Left. It was the largest, Ramparts. I recruited my bookkeeper, was 42 years old and had 3 children, to keep the books of the school because I had created a tax-exempt foundation. And the Panthers murdered her. And the whole left defended them. I wrote about this in a book called Radical Son, which, if you want to understand it, where we're at, it's not a bad book to read.
Hello, sir. My name is Matthew Rosen. I'm from Nordhoff High School, and it's in Ojai, California. And I have 2 questions for you. First of which being, do you believe the far right in Europe will rise against the socialists like Merkel and Lofgren? And the second of which being, as a fellow Hebrew, I feel as if I am kind of caught in the middle here, because many of our brethren are more liberal than conservative. We have like 30% Jews in the Republican Party. The rest are most likely Democrats. So I feel as if if they do rise up, they'd come for other Jews in Europe as well. Do you think something like that?
Well, I think there's always a fascist threat in Europe. But I don't know that that's true of, Steve Bannon's out there trying to mobilize them. I don't follow European politics that closely. I think that the dangers of the alt-right are ridiculously exaggerated. Whether they had a national march of 500 people. The Ku Klux Klan at its height, which was a Democratic Party organization, had 11 senators and I don't remember, something like 47 congressmen. Anybody know of a neo-Nazi congressperson? Well, I do. Keith Ellison would fit in that category for me. But no, it's an insignificant. How powerful they are in Europe, I don't know. And why are Jews liberal? That was the other part of that question. Well, because the Jews that are liberal are not religious. And you have to understand that leftism, progressivism, so-called liberalism, is a crypto religion. It believes in a paradise, and it's in the history of the Catholic Church, it's called the Pelagian heresy. They believe that paradise, that heaven can be created on earth by human beings, which is the essence of the stupidity of leftists. How can government, which is composed of the same people causing the problems, but you just give them a lot more power, create anything good? So these Jews, people have, they want to feel that their lives are meaningful. And religion provides that. If there is an authentic religion says, we see through a glass darkly, and only then, after we're gone, face to face, when it'll all be sorted out. But the left thinks they can sort it out, and that's why they're incredibly dangerous. It will justify anything. If you believe that you can create heaven on earth, that you can end war and poverty and racial prejudice and sexism, whatever. If you believe that, what lie will you not tell? And what crime will you not either commit yourself or support? And they do it, nothing has changed. As a former leftist, I was back in I can't remember the exact date, of the first Iraq War, when Saddam Hussein had swallowed a whole country. And I said, now are my former comrades going to go out and put up a defensive line for Saddam Hussein? And sure enough, they did. There's no evil that's too evil in the world for the left if they're attacking this country. It's that bad. Yes, sir.
Question. for you, please. The Mueller investigation, number one, what do you think about it? Number two, the deep swamp theory, which is not only Democrats, but also Republicans are apparently down there swimming in the swamp as well, and how that might relate to it. And then the last question, recently I've been reading some commentary that seems to be indicating that what he's going after is to find any minor incident where President Trump may have perjured himself. And what do you think about any of those issues, and particularly the probability of the latter?
I think Sean Hannity has covered all those bases. But I was shocked when Jimmy Hoffa disappeared. The young people are too young to remember this. But here was a national figure, and he just is gone, and there's no arrests. I was shocked that that could happen. But that was nothing compared to the corruption of the FBI, the corruption of the Democratic Party. It's just mind-boggling, mind-boggling. The Clinton cartel, what did they steal, $100 million? She sold the office of the Secretary of State to line their pockets of Peter Schweitzer, who worked for both Ron and me. It's his new book. I mean, Kerry, who, by the way, his family, his daughter is married to the mullahs, to one of the mullahs in Hitlerite Iran. That's Kerry. But Kerry and Biden and their kids or whatever, they made off with $1 billion deal. Again, trading on the, it's horrendous. So I don't know if that answers your question. I don't trust Mueller as far as I could throw him. They're all corrupt. Every time they say, because I remember how they introduced Comey, beyond reproach, then if it's a nonpartisan, I know I've got a crook right there. Thank you.
Thank you so much to David Horowitz for being here to share his wisdom and his story with us today. I have a few quick announcements for the students here, so if everyone could please stay in their seats for just another moment. Students, the time has finally arrived. You're headed to the ranch next. Please use the restrooms quickly if you need to, and then make your way out to the shuttles. If you look inside your name tags again, you'll notice that there's a letter in there. The letter that's inside your name tag denotes which shuttle you're beginning on, so it's either A, B, C, or D. For everyone else, you received a copy of Big Agenda by David Horowitz, and he'll be signing those up on the second floor galleries. Copies of the Black Book of the American Left are also for sale. Next month, I'm pleased to announce that we will be celebrating a major landmark here at Young America's Foundation and the Reagan Ranch as we denote the 20th anniversary of the foundation stepping forward to save this premier presidential property. We'll be hosting an event for our board and key stakeholders in conjunction with our annual Rawhide Circle retreat. And if you would like more information about Rawhide Circle, I know my colleagues would be more than happy to discuss that with you. Because of this landmark anniversary, we will not be having a roundtable in April, but we are already working on the May event, and so we hope you'll keep an eye out for more information on that. Thank you again to our special guests for joining us today, to Mr. Horowitz, to our supporters and the students who have joined us. Everyone, please have a great afternoon.